I raised her for 22 years. I paid for her college, her brand new car, her luxury apartment in downtown Chicago, and even the $50,000 wedding venue she picked out herself. I gave her the world. But when the big day finally came, she looked me in the eye and told me her wedding was yesterday and that it was just for special people. I wasn't invited. I was crushed. But a week later, she called me screaming because her rent was overdue and her credit cards were declining. My response? Well, let's just say she learned a very expensive lesson that day. Welcome back to Inspiration Seeker. If you believe that respect goes both ways, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments. If your child did this to you, would you cut them off? Let's get into the story. My name is Henry. I'm 58 years old, and for the better part 2 decades, I had defined my life by one singular purpose: making sure my daughter, Pamela, never felt a moment of hardship. When her mother passed away when Pamela was just 6, I was devastated, but I made a silent vow to myself. I promised that I would be enough for both parents. Looking back, I realized I might confuse love with providing, but at the time, it felt like the right thing to do. I've done well for myself in the logistics business here in Chicago, which allowed me to give Pamela a life most kids only dream of. I didn't just support her. I curated her existence. When she wanted to study art history, I paid the tuition in full. No loans required. When she complained that the dorms were too loud for her to focus, I didn't tell her to buy earplugs. Instead, I signed a lease on a gorgeous 2-bedroom apartment overlooking the river. I paid the rent, the utilities, and the internet bill every single month. I even bought her a white SUV for her 21st birthday because she said taking the L train was too dangerous at night. Then came Bruce. Pamela met him about 2 years ago. He was an aspiring entrepreneur, which seemed to be code for unemployed with expensive taste. Bruce never really looked me in the eye when he shook my hand. He'd just call me Pops and ask what kind of scotch I was serving. I didn't like him, but Pamela was head over heels. So when they announced their engagement, I swallowed my pride and took out my checkbook. They wanted a fairy tale wedding. Pamela sat me down and showed me a mood board that looked like it belonged in a celebrity magazine. "Daddy," she said, with that sweet smile she used whenever she needed something. "This is my big day. It has to be perfect." I agreed to everything. The historic venue, the 5-course catering menu, the open bar, the designer dress. It all totaled over $50,000. I wrote the checks without hesitating. In my mind, the money didn't matter. I was just picturing that one moment, walking my little girl down the aisle and handing her off to her new life. I thought I was a hero of this story. I had no idea I was just a bank. As the wedding month finally arrived, the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't the joyous anticipation I had expected. Instead, a strange fog of secrecy descended over everything. You would think that as the father of the bride and the person bankrolling the entire event, I would be in the loop. But every time I tried to get specifics, Pamela was slippery. I remember calling her on a Tuesday afternoon to ask about the rehearsal dinner. I wanted to know if I needed to book a private room at her favorite steakhouse, Gibson's. Her voice on the phone sounded tight, almost dismissive. "Don't worry about it, Dad," she said quickly. "Bruce is handling the logistics. We're trying to keep things fluid." Fluid? I asked, confused. "Pamela, the wedding is 3 weeks away. People need to know where to be." "We're downsizing a bit," she replied vaguely. "Just trust the process, okay? You're stressing me out." I backed off immediately. The last thing I wanted was to be the overbearing father. I chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters. I told myself that modern weddings were different than they were in my day. Maybe fluid was the new trend. But the red flags kept popping up. A few days later, I happened to be in her neighborhood downtown, so I decided to stop by the apartment to drop off a set of vintage pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. I wanted Pamela to have them as her something old. I didn't call ahead. Why would I? I paid the rent. It felt like my second home. But when I buzzed the intercom, there was a long pause. Finally, Pamela's voice crackled through. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I have a surprise for you," I said cheerfully. "Buzz me up." "No," she practically shouted. Then, softening her tone, she added, I mean, the place is a total disaster area. Boxes everywhere. I'll come down to the lobby. She met me downstairs 10 minutes later, looking flustered and checking her phone constantly. She took the earrings, gave me a quick side hug, and barely made eye contact. She acted like I was a delivery driver she was trying to get rid of, not her father. Standing there in the cold marble lobby, I felt a distinct chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It hurt. I can't lie, it really hurt. But I was so determined to make her happy that I ignored my gut instinct. I told myself she was just overwhelmed. I told myself she was trying to spare me the stress of the planning. So, instead of confronting her, I went home and wrote the final check for the venue catering. Another $12,000 sent into the void, paying for a party I was slowly realizing I knew nothing about. It was a Tuesday, one of those crisp, gray Chicago mornings where the wind cuts right through your coat. I was walking out of a coffee shop in the Loop, balancing a latte and checking my emails, when I heard a familiar voice call out my name. Henry! Henry, hold up. I turned around to see Anthony jogging toward me. Anthony is the landlord of the building where Pamela lives. We've known each other for years, mostly through the monthly checks I send him to cover her rent. He's a good guy, talkative, always quick with a handshake. Hey, Anthony, I said, forcing a smile, though I was in a rush. Good to see you. Is everything okay with the apartment? The heating working all right? He laughed and clapped a hand on my shoulder. The apartment is fine, Henry. I just wanted to say congratulations. I saw the photos Bruce posted on Instagram yesterday. The wedding looked absolutely stunning. My heart stopped. I mean that literally. For a split second, my chest seized up, and the noise of the city traffic seemed to fade into a dull hum. I stared at him, my mind racing to make sense of his words. The wedding? I stammered, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Yeah, last weekend. Anthony continued, oblivious of the world crumbling beneath my feet. That venue by the lake? Incredible choice. Bruce looked sharp, and Pamela, wow, she looked like a movie star. You must be so proud, Papa Bear. It looked like a hell of a party. I felt the blood drain from my face. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to drop my coffee right there on the pavement. My mind flashed back to our phone calls, the vague excuses, the fluid plans. They hadn't been downsizing. They hadn't been stressed. They had been celebrating. Without me. But pride is a funny thing. Instead of breaking down or screaming in confusion, I went into survival mode. I couldn't let Anthony know that I, the man paying for the roof over a bride's head, hadn't even been told the date. Oh, yes, I managed to choke out, forcing a painful grimace that I hoped looked like a smile. It was a beautiful day. Thank you, Anthony. Well, give the happy couple my best, he said, checking his watch. See you around, Henry. He walked away, whistling. I stood there on the crowded sidewalk, clutching a cooling cup of coffee, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The check for the venue had cleared 3 days ago. I had paid for the party of the year, and I hadn't even been allowed to see it. I didn't go back to the office. I walked straight to my car, my hands trembling slightly as I unlocked the door. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, just gripping the steering wheel, breathing in the smell of leather and trying to calm the pounding in my chest. I navigated through the downtown traffic, driving automatically toward the building I had paid for every month for the last 3 years. I didn't rehearse what I was going to say. I just knew I needed to hear the truth from her lips. When I got to her door, I didn't knock politely. I pounded on it, not like a madman, but with the authority of a landlord or a father who had been played for a fool. It took a minute before Pamela opened the door. She was wearing a silk robe, another gift I had likely paid for indirectly, and she looked annoyed, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Dad?" she groaned, leaning against the doorframe. "Seriously? It's the middle of the day. You can't just barge in here without calling. We're recovering." "Recovering?" I repeated, my eyes dropping instantly to her left hand. There it was, a brand new, glittering diamond band sitting right next to her engagement ring. It caught the light from the hallway, mocking me. I pushed past her, stepping into the living room. It was a mess of empty champagne bottles, gift bags, and balloons. Recovering from what, Pamela? I asked, turning to face her. My voice was dangerously quiet. When is the wedding? She let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes as if I were the one being unreasonable. She closed the door and walked over to the sofa, flopping down onto it. Okay, look, she said, not even looking at me. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it, because we knew you'd be weird. Weird? I asked. I paid for the venue. I paid for the food. I paid for the dress. When was the wedding? Yesterday, she snapped, throwing her hands up. Okay, it was yesterday. The confirmation hit me harder than the rumor had. And where was my invitation? I asked, my voice cracking just a fraction. I'm your father, Pamela. I raised you. Why wasn't I there? She looked at me then, with a chilling sort of pity. It was the look you give a child who doesn't understand a joke. Dad, listen, she said, picking at her fingernails. It was intimate. We wanted a specific aesthetic. Honestly, the guest list was just 4 special people. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Special people, I repeated numbly. Yeah, she continued, gaining confidence. You know, our influencer friends, people from Bruce's network. We didn't want the older crowd. They're killing the vibe. You wouldn't have fit the photos. Dad, it would have looked off. She said it so casually, as if erasing her father from the most important day of her life was simply a matter of interior design or color coordination. She didn't apologize. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, waiting for me to accept my place as a financier who was too uncool to be seen in public. Special people. That phrase echoed in my head, bouncing around my skull like a trapped bird. I stood in the middle of that living room, a room I paid for, trying to process the sheer magnitude of the disrespect. So, I said, my voice steady but cold as ice. Let me get this straight. I am good enough to write the checks. I am good enough to buy the car, sitting in the garage downstairs. But I am not special enough to watch my own daughter get married. Pamela let out a huff of frustration, grabbing a bottle of water from the coffee table. Oh my God, Dad, stop being so dramatic. It's not about money. It's about the brand. Bruce and I are trying to build a following online. We needed the wedding to look a certain way for the photos. Having a bunch of older people walking around in out-of-style suits just kills the vibe. You wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. The music was loud and it went late. She actually believed she was making sense. That was the scariest part. She looked me dead in the eye and told me that my presence, the presence of the man who wiped her tears, taught her to ride a bike, and sat by her bedside when she had the flu, was an aesthetic liability. I wasn't a father to her. I was a prop that didn't fit the set design. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. I was waiting for her to realize how cruel she sounded and say, I'm sorry, Dad, that came out wrong. But the apology never came. Instead, she checked her phone again and frowned at the screen. Speaking of money, she said, pivoting the conversation without missing a beat. I checked my account this morning, and the transfer for the honeymoon shopping hasn't hit yet. We fly to Bali in 2 days, and I need to buy some new outfits. Can you call the bank? It's usually instant. That was the moment. It wasn't the wedding snub that finally broke me. It was that sentence. In that split second, the veil lifted. I didn't see my little girl anymore. I saw a stranger. I saw a parasite who viewed me as nothing more than a walking ATM with a pulse. She didn't want me. She wanted my resources. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I looked at her, really looked at her, one last time. I see, was all I said. I turned on my heel and walked out the door, leaving it wide open behind me. She yelled something about the bank transfer as I walked down the hallway, but I didn't look back. I was already done. I drove away from that building with a strange sense of calm. You might expect me to be blindingly angry, screaming at the windshield, or maybe heading to the nearest bar to drown my sorrows in scotch. But I didn't do any of that. For 22 years, I had operated with the unconditional love of a father. But Pamela had made it clear. Our relationship wasn't familial. It was transactional. And if there is one thing I know how to handle, it's a bad business deal. I went straight to my office, closed the door, and sat behind my mahogany desk. My first call was to Joe. Joe isn't just my best friend. He's my attorney and the man who manages my trust structures. Joe, I said, skipping the pleasantries, I need you to cancel the standing monthly transfer to Pamela's account. Immediately. Joe paused. He knows how much I dote on her. Is everything okay, Henry? Did something happen? She got married yesterday. I told him, my voice flat. I wasn't invited. Apparently, I don't fit the aesthetic. Joe let out a low whistle. He didn't ask any more questions. Consider it done, he said. I'll freeze the transfer within the hour. Next, I picked up the phone and dialed the platinum service line for my credit card company. Pamela carried a supplemental card on my account, a black card with a limit most people would kill for. She used it for everything: groceries, gas, designer handbags, and evidently that honeymoon shopping she was so worried about. I need to cancel a card, I told the representative. Certainly, sir. Is the card lost or stolen? Neither, I replied. The user is no longer authorized. Cancel it effective immediately. If any charges come through from this minute forward, decline them. Finally, the hardest call. I dialed Anthony. Just an hour ago, he had congratulated me on the wedding I didn't attend. Now, I was about to ruin his day and hers. Anthony, it's Henry again, I said. Hey, Henry. What's up? I'm calling about the lease on Unit 4B. I know it's up for renewal next month, and I've been covering the month-to-month in the meantime. I took a deep breath. I will not be renewing the lease, and I will not be paying the rent for the upcoming month. You need to inform the tenants that they are solely responsible for the payments moving forward. Whoa, Henry. Anthony sounded panicked. That's a $3,000 unit. Can they afford that? They're adults, Anthony, I said, leaning back in my chair. They're special people. I'm sure they'll figure out. I hung up the phone. Just like that, the faucet was turned off. The money that had flowed so freely for 2 decades had dried up in 20 minutes. It wasn't rage. It was simply the end of the contract. For the next 7 days, my phone was blissfully silent. You might think I spent that week pacing the floor, worrying about my little girl, or staring at old photo albums with tears in my eyes. You would be wrong. For the first time in 22 years, I felt lighter. It was as if a heavy, invisible backpack filled with rocks had been lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't realized how much mental energy I had been burning just trying to anticipate Pamela's needs, trying to cushion her from the world, trying to buy her affection. I spent the weekend golfing with Joe at the club. Usually, I'd be checking my phone every few holes, worried that Pamela might have a flat tire or a crisis with her hair appointment. This time, I left my phone in the locker. We played 18 holes, drank a few cold beers, and I actually laughed a real deep belly laugh. You look 10 years younger, Henry. Joe remarked as we walked off the 18th green. I feel it, Joe, I replied. I really do. On Wednesday, I walked past a luxury watch boutique. I had been eyeing a specific Patek Philippe for years, but I always talked myself out of it. That's too selfish, I would tell myself. That money should go into Pamela's trust fund. That could be a down payment on her house. I stopped, looked at my reflection in the window, and walked right in. I bought the watch. I wore out of the store. Every time I checked the time, it didn't remind me of a schedule I was late for. It reminded me that my time and my resources were finally my own again. The most telling part of that week, however, wasn't what I did. It was what Pamela didn't do. She didn't call. She didn't text. There was absolute radio silence. That silence was the final nail in the coffin. It proved everything I had suspected in that hallway. She wasn't mad at me. She just didn't need me yet. She assumed the rent had been paid. She assumed the credit card was working. As long as the invisible machinery of my bank account was running in the background, she had no use for her father. She was probably packing for Bali, laughing with Bruce about how they had trimmed the fat from their wedding guest list, completely oblivious of the fact that the ground beneath them had already crumbled away. I checked the calendar on my kitchen wall. It was the 30th. Rent was due on the 1st. The silence was about to end. The first of the month arrived on a Monday. I was sitting in my study, enjoying a cup of coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal. The house was quiet, peaceful. I knew exactly what was coming, but I wasn't anxious. I felt the calm of a man who has already boarded up his windows before the hurricane hits. At 10:03 a.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. The caller ID flashed a photo of Pamela, a picture from her high school graduation where she was beaming at me. I let it ring. I watched it vibrate until it went to voicemail. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Then a text, "Dad, pick up now." Then another call. I took a slow sip of my coffee, cleared my throat, and finally slid my thumb across the screen. "Hello." I didn't even get the chance to say good morning. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Pamela's voice was so shrill, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She wasn't crying. She was furious. "Anthony just called me. He said the rent check for this month hasn't cleared. He said he hasn't received anything. He's talking about late fees and eviction notices. Did you forget to send it? How can you be so irresponsible?" I stayed silent, letting her rant. "And that's not even the worst part," she continued, her voice pitching up an octave. "I'm at the mall right now. I'm at the Sephora counter with a basket full of makeup for the trip, and my card got declined." "Declined, Dad?" The cashier looked at me like I was a criminal. It was so embarrassing. There were people behind me in line. In the background, I could hear Bruce shouting something incoherent. It sounded like, "Tell him I'll sue the bank. This is unacceptable." I sat there, listening to the chaos on the other end of the line. I waited for a pause. I waited for her to ask, "Dad, are you okay? Is business bad? Did something happen to your accounts?" I waited for a single shred of concern for the man she was screaming at, but there was nothing. There was only concern for her reputation, her makeup, and her apartment. She didn't care why the money had stopped. She was just angry that the faucet was dry. The entitlement was so thick, it was suffocating. She truly believed that my resources were her birthright, regardless of how she treated me. "Are you even listening to me?" she screamed, snapping me back to the moment. "Fix this. Transfer the money right now, so I can pay for this stuff." I took a deep breath, leaned back in my leather chair, and prepared to deliver the reality check she had been needing for 22 years. I let her finish screaming. I let the echoes of her entitlement bounce around the room before I said a single word. I could hear the heavy breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of a spoiled child who had never been told no in her entire life, waiting for her father to apologize and fix everything. "Dad!" she shrieked again, her voice cracking with desperation. "Did you hear me? The rent is overdue. Did you forget? You have to wire the money now." I leaned forward, rested my elbows on my mahogany desk, and spoke with a calmness that was terrifyingly absolute. "No, Pamela, I didn't forget." "Then what is it?" she demanded. "Why are you doing this?" "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice low and steady. "Didn't I tell you?" There was a confused silence on the line. "Tell me? Tell me what?" she stammered. "Didn't I tell you that I was just the older crowd?" I continued, savoring the words. "Didn't I tell you that I was the one who kills the vibe? You were very clear last week, Pamela. You said your wedding was for special people only. You said I didn't fit the aesthetic." I heard her gasp. The realization hit her like a freight train. "Dad, that was just for the party," she cried, her tone shifting instantly from anger to panic. "You can't be serious. We have bills. We're just starting our lives. You can't do this to us." "I can, and I did," I replied. "You see, I sat down and looked at my finances, and I realized that my money's exactly like your wedding. It's exclusive. It is strictly for special people. People who love me, people who respect me, people who don't hide their marriage from me because I'm not cool enough for Instagram." "But we're family," she wailed. Bruce was now yelling in the background, something about rights and lawyers. "We were family when you cashed the check for the venue," I said cold-heartedly. "But when it came time to walk down the aisle, I was a stranger. So now, I'm treating you like a stranger. Welcome to the real world. Pamela, the older crowd, is officially retired from the bank of Dad. Dad, please. We can't afford this apartment without you. Then I suggest you move, I said. I hear the suburbs are very affordable. Just make sure the aesthetic suits you. I didn't wait for her to reply. I pressed the red button on my phone screen and ended the call. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was victorious. It has been 2 months since I hung up that phone. For the first few weeks, my phone blew up with calls from random numbers. Bruce's friends, I assume, or maybe even Bruce himself, trying to guilt-trip me. I blocked every single one of them. I didn't change my number. I just changed my boundaries. Last week, a letter arrived in the mail. It was a thick envelope with Pamela's handwriting on the front. There was no return address. I opened it, expecting perhaps a heartfelt apology, maybe an admission that she had been selfish. Instead, it was 4 pages of victimization. She wrote about how hard their lives had become. She detailed how they had been forced to move out of a downtown high-rise and into a cramped studio apartment in a less desirable part of the city. She complained that the walls were thin and the heating was loud. She mentioned that Bruce had to sell his beloved motorcycle just to cover their credit card minimums. She ended the letter not with "I'm sorry," but with "I hope you're happy knowing your daughter is struggling." I read it twice. Then, I did something that might surprise you. I didn't reach for my checkbook. I didn't feel a pang of guilt. I went to the store, bought a nice mahogany frame, and I framed that letter. I hung it in my hallway, right where I grab my keys every morning. It's not a trophy of my cruelty. It's a reminder. It reminds me that I am a person, not a resource. It reminds me that love is an action, not a transaction. As for me, I'm doing better than ever. I finally asked Cynthia out. She's a wonderful woman I met at the golf club who actually asked me how my day was. We are planning a trip to Italy next spring. I'm going to spend my money on pasta, wine, and good company, on special people who actually want me around. I learned the hard way that being a good father doesn't mean being a doormat. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your children is to let them grow up. Time has a funny way of revealing the truth, doesn't it? It has been exactly 18 months since the day I cut Pamela off. Last weekend, I found myself standing at an altar again. But this time, it wasn't to hand someone away. It was to start a new chapter. I married Cynthia in a beautiful, loud, chaotic ceremony filled with friends, laughter, and yes, plenty of the older crowd. We danced until 2 a.m. It was a vibe I had been missing for years. I didn't invite Pamela. It wasn't out of spite. It was out of respect for the boundaries she established. If I wasn't special enough for her wedding, I wouldn't force her to endure mine. But the story has one final twist. At the reception, I ran into Anthony, my old friend and Pamela's former landlord. He looked hesitant to bring it up, but after a glass of champagne, he spilled the beans. He told me that Pamela and Bruce are no longer together. Apparently, less than 6 months after the money stopped flowing, the argument started. When they actually had to work to pay their own bills, the influencer lifestyle crumbled. Bruce filed for divorce and moved back to the West Coast. Hearing that didn't make me happy. No father wants to hear that his daughter is heartbroken and divorced before 30. But it gave me a moment of absolute clarity. Bruce didn't love Pamela. He loved the apartment, the car, and the black credit card, all things I provided. By cutting them off, I didn't ruin her life. I actually forced the truth to the surface. I stopped funding a lie. I sent Pamela a small card yesterday. No checks, no cash, just a simple note that said, "I hope you find someone who loves you for you, not for what you can buy them." I don't know if she'll reply, and for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that. I have my own life to live now. And that brings us to the end of Henry's journey. It's a harsh reminder that sometimes the people we do the most for are the ones who appreciate the least. Henry had to make the impossible choice between enabling his daughter or respecting himself. Now, I want to turn this over to you. What would you have done? If you found out your child hid their wedding from you because you weren't cool enough, would you have cut them off immediately, or would you have tried to talk it out? And do you think Pamela will ever learn her lesson? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please destroy that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Inspiration Seeker and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story that opens your eyes to the real world. Thank you for watching. Stay strong and remember, respect is earned, not given. See you in the next video.